Dark Fire by Rose Mackey, Book 2 of the Under Violet Sun series. Chapter 7. Briefing. Encrypted transmission, Sedai Delegate Amira Lien to Kadek Maral Lien. Sister, I have received concerning news. The Alliance has dispatched a Malurian, McEnroy, as their envoy to Colony 29. Officially, it is to render assistance after your challenges. Unofficially, I don't know. They did not consult me, which is highly unusual as the Falosian representative for the colony. I have spoken to Maman Zalud, the Verit representative, and she did not know either. Someone is scheming here, but to what end I don't yet know. Take care of yourself and your colony. I will let you know when I find out more. End transmission. Zera woke the next morning and lay in bed, feeling relaxed and happy in a way that she hadn't in years. She contemplated the day ahead. She was off shift. She would find Odran, have their breakfast and discuss the next steps. Odran would be doing his paperwork in Medbay until lunch, so she could go annoy Fila for a while. After, maybe they could go to that oasis in the forest that Dinara had told her about. A little swim would be great for his rehabilitation, and seeing Odran shirtless and wet would certainly be good for her. She gave a delicious full body stretch. She couldn't believe she was enjoying the thought of seeing him again. After yesterday's training session, she had thought their brief friendship was over, but last night changed everything. Sure, he was an arrogant pain in the ass, but he was also funny and charming, and there weren't many males willing to go head-to-head with her. She felt a twinge of fear, caution that she was moving too quickly with him, that she should slow down and pull back, but she quashed it ruthlessly. She was on a new planet, and she gave herself permission to try this new relationship with openness and optimism. Plan for the day decided, she hopped up into her sonic shower, smearing her skin with a lovely scented cleanser that she had bought in a tiny market stall on Valhalla. Valhalla was a market planet, the entire colony covered in hundreds of different markets and bazaars, all forming a single intricate mosaic of colour and noise and scent. She had spent several wild days there with her sisters on her last vacation, flitting between the bars, restaurants and markets. She had adored the Rilaza, the perfume and cosmetics market, the most. It had been a riot to her senses, and she had spent far too much money on lotions and potions, but she didn't regret it for a moment. After spending so much of her life as a warrior, she treasured her small feminine indulgences. Her tattoos were another example, making her feel powerful and beautiful while doing nothing to impede her efficiency as a warrior. She admired her latest addition, a tracery of lace in shimmering crystal ink just over her collarbones and dipping down her sternum. After her shower, she braided her tail of hair, weaving a string of beaten gold beads through the heavy mass of blonde-shot brunette curls, and scratched her nails slightly over the bristles on the shaved sides of her head, deciding it could wait another day before she shaved again. Considering, she selected a light elitum necklace. She had barely worn any adornment in the month she'd been here. The entire colony had been advised to stay in their AI-monitored jumpsuits until the perimeter was secured, so that an alert could be sounded if someone was harmed. This week was the first time they had been granted permission to wear personal clothing while not on duty. She held the necklace up to her throat, and the morphic rope wound itself sinuously around her neck and down to form a little hook above her cleavage, where a pendant could be attached. The AI-controlled rope grew tiny tendrils, detecting her crystal ink tattoo, and designing a light metallic tracery of droplets that complemented and framed the lace whorls in her skin. When the elitum had settled into its final design, she attached a tiny triple-headed goddess pendant to the hook provided, and stopped to admire the design. The elitum was never the same design twice, responding to a complex set of environmental and personal parameters. While it was programmable to an extent, the beauty of elitum jewellery was in their uniqueness. They were wearable, one-of-a-kind art. The very nature of the design was ephemeral. As soon as she removed the jewellery, it would return to its inert morphic rope state. This time the elitum looked like moonlight on beads of water, scattered along the lace, a pale platinum/silver with hints of palest blue. It was a typically Falosian product, designed to harmonise and interact with its external environment, replicating natural shapes and concepts, and was one of their most popular exports. Elitum was also worth an arm and a leg. This piece had been a gift from her mother's and all of her sisters combined, and she adored it. Next, she selected a light loose-knit wrap dress in a pretty light green, and was pulling on her sandals when she was interrupted by a ping on her HUD. Blinking to accept, it was an audiocom from Lucius, instructing her to attend the cadet's office immediately for an urgent briefing. She stilled. She was a VDEC, a senior officer, but she rarely interacted with the cadet in a formal capacity, most of her orders coming through Gadek Sraya or Lucius as first warrior. She cast a quick eye over her outfit, deciding it would be acceptable as she was off shift and would not have been expected to be in uniform. Zera reached the cadet's office at the same time as Odran. She flashed him a smile and felt a flush of pride when he stopped in his tracks at the sight of her. He slowly looked her up and down, his eyes full of carnal knowledge from the night before. His gaze followed her crystal tattoo to her cleavage, before continuing his inspection down, taking in every curve. "You look most beautiful, my lady." Zera was mortified when she felt the blush creep up her neck, and she resisted an urge to smooth her dress. Her mouth dry, she croaked out a response. "Back to my lady. I thought we were on a first-name basis." It seemed appropriate. His voice was husky. He reached out, placed a gentle fingertip on her sternum, and it took her a moment to realize that he had lifted the goddess pendant from her chest to examine it. "May I?" She nodded, speechless, feeling strangely vulnerable in the daylight, without the distance of the training room or her athletic clothing, without the hushed darkness of her apartment. There she could flirt and laugh and joke, secure in her place of power. Here? It was suddenly very real, and she felt like she had stepped into quicksand. He moved closer to her, examining the little image in the light. "This is beautiful. This is a representation of the goddess, yes?" She nodded again, wondering when exactly the power of speech had deserted her. "I had forgotten that Falosians worship the triple goddess as well. On Verit they are Manat Rai, Evanat Rai and Dalat Rai, the goddess with 3 faces." Zera found herself responding. "It is a common belief system. In species with sexual dimorphism, where a female bears children, it often becomes a founding spirituality that a goddess mother figure births and protects the universe." She was mortified. What the hell was she saying? Zera could feel herself speaking, but had absolutely no control over the words coming out of her mouth. Odran's closeness, the warmth of his fingers against her collarbone, his breath against her face, all of it brought her thoughts to a screeching halt. Fascinating. She could see him fixated on her mouth, just a couple of inches separating them. "When we train, you often remind me of Dalat Rai, her warrior aspect." Her breath exhaled in a rush. "It is good to see you on your feet, healer." Like flicking a switch, Odran's face calmed, his emotions shuttered. A charming smile appeared on his visage. It was disconcerting, the speed with which he changed personas. Which was the real Odran? The dark, intense stranger from last night, dominant and playful? The flirtatious male from training? Or this charming stranger? He switched faces with an ease that unsettled her, making her realize that she didn't know the real Odran at all. Odran stepped away and turned around, bowing in one smooth motion to the maman as she shuffled up, leaning on her mate, Prime Brune, and her maman la aide. Zera arranged her face into a neutral expression, reeling back her surging emotions and concealing her shock at the state of the other female. In the last month, the maman had deteriorated significantly. Gone was the diminutive, elegant queen. In her place was a withered, frail female. "My lady!" Odran's voice was calm, controlled, betraying nothing of the intensity of their interaction. "How may I aid you?" The maman smiled at him, and it amazed Zera to see genuine warmth in her clear gaze. "Nothing, healer. I thank the goddess that you are recovering, but you are still far too thin. Save your energy for your own healing journey." She examined him carefully and grunted, apparently satisfied with whatever her inspection had revealed. "At least Dinara seems able to assist you. She's not entirely incompetent." Zera opened her mouth to defend Dinara, but a fit of coughing overtook the maman. She fumbled for a cloth and Skara handed her an embroidered linen square, the Prime and Odran exchanging pained glances over her head. "Come, Odie, walk in with me. Tell me about your treatment plan. I'm always keen to hear from you." She reached out a claw-like hand and gripped Odran around his wrist as the Prime shifted to help her. "Attend us, Skara. I know you have wished to inquire after the healer's health." Skara nodded gracefully, beaming at Odran as she fell into step with them. Zera exhaled a gusty breath, trying to get a handle on herself. Her heart was racing, too many emotions flooding her in a brief space of time. She took several long breaths, grounding herself, before she followed the others into the admin building towards the Kadek's office. The conference table was a long oval. The Kadek was already seated at the head of the table, every inch the military leader in her Falosian pale blue jumpsuit and cropped silver hair. Falosians were a people painted in vibrant colour, and the Kadek was no exception, her skin a dark, ruddy red. She had the classic Falosian yellow eyes with large black pupils. Lucius and Dinara sat on her right, leaving a spare seat between them and the Kadek Sreya. Sreya motioned her to take the vacant spot between her and Lucius, while Odran and the Mammon's party sat opposite her. The Kadek wasted no time. "Thank you all for coming. My apologies for the abrupt summons. We have received urgent news." The Kadek's eyes flickered as she interfaced with her HUD to activate the streaming screen over the table. An image of a 3D star map appeared, showing their sector, then zooming out to a red blinking dot several sectors away. A countdown timer appeared in the top right corner. In less than a week, an Alliance envoy will be arriving. Officially, they are coming to provide support and assistance, given the disruptions we have experienced during the colony establishment. Zera nodded in understanding. The first month had been chaos. Multiple supplies had been stolen, and the preliminary surveys had been wildly inaccurate, meaning that their security perimeter had taken weeks to establish. There was something in the environment that meant that scanning technology was very limited, even with the compensating algorithms that Sreya and her team had developed. The Alliance had sent replacement supplies, and the replacement ship had also been destroyed, supposedly by pirates. Someone wanted to derail the establishment of the new colony. The Kadek had been forced to publicly execute a saboteur that had been found. Belatedly, Zera realized the others were silent, and she felt their spike of anxiety. Why would they be anxious about Alliance help? Lucius spoke into the silence. "You said officially. What is it you believe they are here to do unofficially?" The Kadek took a deep breath. "I have been given confidential intel that the envoy is McEnroy, a Malurian." The Maman sucked in a sharp breath. "Decline their visit, immediately. We cannot allow them to come here." Lucius snarled. "For once I agree with the Maman. A Malurian cannot set a single claw on this planet." Dinara lifted a finger to speak. "My apologies, but can someone please fill me in? What is wrong with a Malurian? What is a Malurian?" The Maman looked like she had sucked a lemon. "They are a predatory alien species, not human template, not part of the Alliance. They are highly active in interstellar politics, and are often used in treaty negotiations as intermediaries and negotiators." She grimaced. "They are also well known as assassins and spies for hire. They are extremely expensive." Odran frowned. "That makes little sense. The Alliance has an entire planet full of administrators. This is the first new colony in a century. Why would they send an alien as an envoy, especially one they had to pay for?" Zera nodded again as she considered the implications. The Alliance was deeply xenophobic. The entire purpose of the Alliance was to advance the interests of human template species in a universe that was brimming with kingdoms, hives, empires, and conglomerates of other species. They particularly hated giving away Alliance funds and resources to other species when a human template species could do the job. The Kadek spoke softly. "Malurians are known to work for Svoboda." It was like a bomb dropped into the room. The Maman hissed, the Prime snarled, and Lucius started swearing. Zera was genuinely impressed with some of the colour in his language. She noted a few phrases down for use later. The Kadek looked at Zera. "My apologies, Zera. I know you haven't been fully briefed on the background yet. Suffice to say, we have evidence that Svoboda is behind the theft and destruction of our supplies and the saboteur last year. They also unsuccessfully tried to have the colony establishment stopped a couple of years ago." Zera's brow furrowed. There was clearly a lot more going on than she was aware of, and she still wasn't entirely sure why she was here with the colony leadership. The Maman was furious. "We absolutely cannot have a Malurian here. You must decline the visit. We are in a fragile state right now. If they find out before we are ready... It would be a disaster. It could jeopardize everything." Zera spoke up. "Excuse me, Kadek, but I still don't understand. While I get that it's not desirable to have them here, the colony is ours, deeded by the Alliance. Surely security can closely supervise them during their review. What could they possibly discover that could jeopardize everything? The Kadek regarded Zera for a long moment before looking at Sreya and nodding. Sreya turned to her. Last month, Dinara discovered Zealand Beta D on the planet. Large deposits. Zera's jaw dropped as Sreya continued. It is resistant to scanning, so the planetary surveys missed it. It's what has been interfering with our survey. If word gets out, we'll have every prospector, pirate, researcher and petty king in this part of the galaxy descend on us. We cannot defend ourselves yet. It will take months to set up a full planetary defense system. Zera closed her mouth with a snap, her mind reeling with the implications. This will change the power structure of this galaxy. The others looked at her gravely. The Kadek nodded to Sreya again. Tell her the rest. Sreya continued. When Odran was injured, he and his team were investigating a crater site a couple of days away. They found evidence of ancient alien tech. Do you know what that means? Zera's head spun with the implications. The presence of ancient alien tech makes this a protected heritage site. It automatically gives the Alliance the right to take over and evict us by revoking the colony deed. If they find out about the tech, it's all the excuse they'll need to take the planet and the Zealand for their own. Sreya smiled approvingly. All the more reason you must decline them, the maman interjected. Perhaps not, my lady, Odran murmured, ignoring the maman when she turned a dark glare on him. If we decline, it will attract attention. Why would we not want help after all of our troubles? Surely there's something to hide if we don't wish an outside observer. The Kadek hummed in agreement. As part of the Alliance Charter, they may send delegates whenever they wish. Officially, this is a friendly envoy. If we reject, it could well become a less friendly investigator. Then we will reject them too, the maman replied hotly. And then what? The might of the Alliance armies? That path only leads to escalation and does not solve the problem. The Prime mused. Perhaps we can make up some excuse. Say there is an illness or some such. Both Dinara and Odran shook their head in response, and Dinara explained, if there is a serious illness, they are required to send aid under Alliance Charter. We'll be crawling with medical personnel in weeks. Even if we said that it had miraculously gone away, they'd see through it quickly. There would be no trace markers of illness in our bodies. Or worse, they could decide to quarantine the planet. We'd never be able to build up enough military defenses to protect ourselves if they can't get past a quarantine blockade. The maman bared her teeth. Then think of something. The Kadek replied mildly, if you would stop issuing orders for a moment, maman, then I will share the plan that my team has come up with. The maman closed her mouth with a snap, and Zera held in an inappropriate urge to giggle. She looked like an indignant house cat. Our only choice is misdirection. We are not yet ready for this confrontation. We must allow the envoy to come and manage what they see to prevent any accidental disclosure. It should not be too challenging. The only people that know are the colony leadership, and now Odran, Dinara, and young Skara. Lucius and Sreya will manage the envoy between them, ensuring that any evidence of Zealand is not found. The maman glared daggers at the Kadek, but remained silent as she continued. We have one priority. We must discover where the alien tech is before this envoy arrives, and how much exactly. It will guide how we structure our interactions. Zera, Odran. Since your accident, we have been planning how we might re-enter the crater chamber in a safer manner. We were hoping to give you more time to recuperate, Odran, but matters have overtaken us. Zera's heart sank. They couldn't possibly be talking about sending out Odran. He had received major surgery just weeks ago. He had been out of bed for less than 2 weeks, and he could barely complete a couple of hours of Delmalayat. He could never manage a full mission. Tomorrow you will leave for the crater site. The engineering team has rigged up landing beacons and comms relays. Zera, you will lead a team to establish a temporary base at the crater site. You will be assigned a small security force, an engineer, and Odran will act as your scientific advisor and guide. Stealth is paramount. Your primary mission is to locate the ancient tech if it is there, make a preliminary assessment, secure the site, report back, and await further orders. You and your team will mid-air drop at the crater. Zera nodded, determined to succeed. This was the first senior mission the Kadek had assigned to her, and she had a fierce desire to prove worthy. Thank you, ma'am, for trusting me with this mission. Zera sucked in a breath, knowing what she needed to do as mission commander, even as it broke her heart. Bracing herself for what would come after, she took a deep breath and raised her hand. If I may, though, I would advise against taking healer Odran. She did not look at him, but out of the corner of her eye she saw him whip around, confusion, hurt and anger on his face. While Odran is a fine scientist, he is not yet recovered sufficiently for this mission. I have been conducting physical therapy exercises with him daily, and am acutely aware of his condition. I request another scientist be assigned. If I take one of the security personnel with me that was on the original crater site mission, they could also act as a guide. The cadet raised an eyebrow. I know that healer Odran is not fully recovered, but the chief healer advises me she has been monitoring his condition daily and that he has recovered enough to participate in this mission in an advisory capacity. Your request is denied. The more people we bring into this, the more people know, and the harder this will be to keep contained. Zera could hardly breathe, her rising panic for Odran clogging her throat. Her heartache at upsetting Odran and her sense of duty formed a churning ball of emotion in her stomach. She wanted to vomit. Dinara leaned forward, sensing her stress. Verit physiology is highly robust, Zera. Provided that Odran does not have another cavern fall on him or do anything foolish to overexert himself, he should be fine. Zera frowned at Dinara. I cannot control all parameters of a mission, Chief Healer. Even with the best planning, things happen. She pulled herself upright in her chair, stuffing her emotions down. Still, my objection is noted. I accept your decision, Cadet. You know, I am sitting right here, and I am a fully qualified healer. I am capable of speaking for myself and determining my own fitness. Odran looked at Zera stonily. Your medical opinion is both incorrect and unnecessary, Videk. Zera's heart pounded in her ears, drowning in a tidal wave of his betrayal and anger, and her own churning fear that in his desire to prove himself he would do himself more harm. Before Zera could speak, Dinara's cool voice cut through their dialogue again. Actually, healer, your medical opinion does not count. As I made clear to you before, in this case you are a normal patient. I am chief healer, and it is my decision whether personnel are cleared for duty. Odran went to retort as Dinara continued to speak over him. The V-Deck is well within her rights to question whether injured personnel assigned to her have been cleared for duty. It is essential that she be aware of the capabilities and limitations of her team. In normal circumstances, you would not have been cleared for more than light duties for another week. However, this is an emergency. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The word limitations left a bitter taste in Odran's mouth, and he barely heard the rest of the meeting. He couldn't believe that Zera had requested him to be removed from the team. Hadn't he tried hard enough? Proved that he was both warrior and healer? After their night together, when he had bared his soul, the magnitude of her betrayal was huge, a leaden weight against his heart. He felt the red rage build, his claws slicing at the insides of his fingers, desperate to release. His people referred to it as the dark stranger, the beast within. The scientist in him knew it was his genetic adaptations responding to stress, flooding him with a biochemical stew designed to help him survive on a battlefield, amping up his aggression, reflexes, senses, focus and processing skills, damping down his pain receptors and impulse control. But the warrior was furious and wanted to succumb to the instincts driving him to fight, to take revenge on his enemies. He stormed out of the meeting as soon as he could, and leaned against the wall outside of the admin building, breathing deeply, trying to calm his furious response to Zera's betrayal. As he reined in his surging emotions, he felt a cold creep over him, an icy fury that replaced the violent urges with the calm patience of the feline predator that was part of his genetic heritage. He opened his eyes when Zera came out, and as he saw her turn to him, he spun to walk away. He did not want to have this confrontation right now, when he might say things that could not be taken back. Odran, wait! She reached out to touch him and he jerked away, ignoring the flash of hurt in her eyes. I'm sorry if I offended you, but I'm genuinely concerned about your welfare. It's my duty to ensure that the team is fit for the mission. It's fine, Videk, you have a job to do. Don't be like that. Like what? He hissed. You want to forget what we've done, who we were becoming to each other, just be professional, fine. She folded her arms defensively. You're being childish. Am I? Tell me, how would you feel if I told you that you weren't fit for duty? If you had been training specifically for one mission and I said you were weak, incapable? I never said you were weak and incapable. You are injured and it takes time to recover. It's nothing to be ashamed of. She paused, and as he watched, he saw her face shudder, saw her totally shut down, and it chilled him to the bone. You know what, Odran? If you made that assessment about my condition, I would accept your decision. I'd respect your position and authority. His temper detonated. Bullshit. Don't you stand there and tell me that our personal interactions had no bearing on your professional judgment. Her eyes narrowed and she stiffened. Think what you will, healer. Just make sure you follow my orders, and don't get so carried away with proving you are well that you run headlong into trouble again. I don't feel like carrying your sorry ass back through the jungle. He saluted her insolently, and she gritted her teeth, spun on her heel and stalked off. He resisted the urge to pound the wall next to him. All he'd do was add a broken hand to his list of deficiencies. Walk with me, brother. Lucius loomed in the doorway. Not right now, Luke. What made you think it was a request? Odran gave a half-hearted snarl and pushed him away. Really, Luke, I'm not good company just now. Lucius slung his arm around Odran's neck and towed him towards the perimeter of the camp. Move your ass, warrior. Time to run off some of that stress so you can think clearly. I'm injured. I shouldn't be running. The acid dripped from his words, settling into his veins. He trudged reluctantly behind Lucius like a stubborn puppy. We aren't going far, responded Lucius placidly. They reached the perimeter line within a few minutes, and the woods loomed before them. Now jog. Lucius cuffed him on the back of his head, eliciting a startled yelp. One look at the first warrior, and Odran knew that a less friendly whack was coming if he did not comply. With a sigh, he trotted off at a slow, gentle jog. Lucius and Odran trotted along in the warming morning light, the air crisp. Tiny jewel-coloured birds flitted between the gnarled trunks of the trees, and an occasional unseen critter rustled in the underbrush. As Odran ran, his muscles loosened, and he felt some of the tension drain out of him. Long minutes later, Lucius took the lead, and Odran realized Luke had a destination in mind, rather than just aimless wandering. They emerged out to a cliffside clearing with a stunning view down a ravine to the river below, and the ocean in the distance. Lucius clambered over some rocks to sit on a large flat plinth, dangling his legs over the side. Gingerly, Odran sat next to him, feeling his ribs and legs spiking in pain in warning. I don't want to talk about it. All right. Lucius offered him a drink from his water canteen. Odran looked at him suspiciously and accepted the drink. It wasn't like Lucius to give up without a fight. It usually meant that he had a sneaky strategy up his sleeve that his opponent wouldn't see coming. How is your leg? Fine. That's why you limped that whole last scree, was it? Odran hunched his back, feeling like a scolded lar. It aches, he finally responded. Have you mentioned this to Dinara? I don't need to. I know what I'm doing, it's fine. It's her job to monitor your condition. What would you say to a patient hiding pain from you? Odran remained mutinously silent. Dinara cares about you and your well-being. She's also a brilliant healer. Don't discount her assessment, and don't undermine her by hiding information necessary for her to do her job. Odran heard the threat hidden in the mild words. Lucius was ferally protective of his new mate, and wouldn't hesitate to reprimand a male that harmed her. Zera cares about you as well. Odran snarled at him, baring his fangs. I said I didn't want to talk about it. She is your commanding officer for this mission, Odran. Do not shame our clan by disobeying your commander because of a personal situation. Or do you think she is not worthy of being your commander? That her judgment is impaired? Do you challenge her right to command? Shock knocked Odran back from the edge of his anger. I would never disrespect her that way. She is a brilliant warrior. You did today. You challenged her judgment in front of the leadership group and her own commander. Lucius looked him in the eyes properly for the first time since the meeting, and Odran realized Luke was truly angry with him. It dawned on him that this little chat might not be about his own emotional state, but was his first warrior giving him a chance to explain his disrespect and disobedience to a senior officer. I didn't. You did. Lucius's voice was firm. You seem to have forgotten the way of the warrior, Odran. You are a male of the Dathalka clan and a public representation of our values and culture. You will never disrespect or disobey your commanding office in public again, or you will face a reprimand. She was wrong. Then you discuss your disagreement in private. If you cannot follow her orders or question her assessment, you come to me. Am I understood? Odran nodded, feeling sick at the realization of how close he had come to outright disobedience. "I am sorry, Luke. I will apologize to her." Lucius returned his attention to the view. "That is a good idea, and for what it is worth, I agree with the Vedek and would have made the same assessment. You are in pain after just a few scree of gentle running. If this was any mission other than advisory, I would have sidelined you myself." Odran didn't respond, acutely aware of the pain in his leg and side. "I understand it is hard, this long recuperation. It is unknown to Verit, but if you push too fast, you will re-injure yourself and will be out for months. You may well cause permanent damage that cannot be repaired. Consider that if my words mean nothing to you." Lucius stilled, his eyes flickering as he accepted a HUD call before he beamed. "My mate is off duty and requests my presence. I suggest you take this time in nature to recenter yourself and remember who you are. I will see you off on your mission tomorrow at the airfield." Lucius stood and clamped a hand on his shoulder in silent support before he left. Chapter 8, Drop Zone.
Encrypted transmission from Burrow to Envoy. Agent Agrentau indicated that the colony had discovered something on the planet. Locate and retrieve information as an immediate priority. Reply Envoy to Burrow. Confirmed. Approaching the colony now. End transmission.
Zera stood at the airfield in the pre-dawn light with her security team. Tarlak Sar and T-Deck Ariel were solid personnel that she had sparred and run simulations with, and she was confident in their capabilities. Ariel, tiny for a Falosian with short natural blue hair betraying her father's alien heritage, was an expert in weapons. Tarlak was an exceptional Verit warrior, fast, smart and efficient. She could not have asked for a better security detail. Odran and her assigned engineer, Olfa Par, had yet to appear. Zera was calm. Her training came to the fore, helping her focus on her mission, pushing personal concerns aside. Distractions were dangerous. Any time her mind strayed to Odran, she ruthlessly wrenched it back into line. She had spent the night studying the briefings from the previous missions, as well as every scrap of information she could gain on ancient tech and Zelan available on the public net. The first sun was peeking over the hillside when Lucius appeared, Odran and Olfa beside him. Apparently the first warrior had been giving his males a pep talk. Good for them. She was mildly jealous. She'd never admit it, but she could use a pep talk herself right about now. Lucius gave her a polite nod, which she returned, and motioned for the group to circle. "You have all received your pre-mission briefings. Vedek Zera will go over your assignments with you on the ship on the way. You will find the equipment already on board. I am here to reiterate that this mission is top priority. You will maintain the highest levels of stealth and secrecy both in mission and afterwards, when you return to the colony. We do not expect any danger on this trip. It is reconnaissance and base establishment only, but as always, you should be prepared for any difficulty that you may find. We have already found one saboteur on this planet. There may be more. Live ammunition is authorized." Zera felt the shock and understanding of the seriousness of the situation ripple through the team. She wasn't a strong empath compared to many Falosians, but her empathy was strong enough given the physical proximity of the group. She felt for their different responses, each giving her an insight into how they would react in the field. As expected, Ariel and Tarlak remained calm, their attention heightened, although Tarlak was also excited about the prospect of combat. Odran was sullen, muted, and she supposed he was still smarting from yesterday. That couldn't be helped. Olfa was highly anxious and regretting eating such a large pre-flight breakfast. She would need to monitor the young technician. Lucius turned to her. "You are in command, Vedek. We have compensated for distortion in comms, so you should be able to communicate via HUD while on the surface, and perhaps a couple of levels down into the cavern. Any lower, and you'll need to install the comms repeater boosters to get a signal with any reliability." She nodded. "Call if you need us. We can be there in a couple of hours." He crossed his right arm across his chest and bowed formally to her, then turned and walked off the airfield. She took a deep breath and turned to her team. "All right, everybody on board. Briefing as soon as we are in the air." She moved to the aircraft, a medium-sized transport vessel in a dull grey metal, slightly pitted from previous hard usage. It had a single large hold with bench seating on either side, capable of seating up to 20 personnel. Their equipment was piled up in the centre in 3 large travel crates, strapped to the floor with yellow webbing. She stood at the gangway, watching her team board before walking after them and pulling the door closed behind her. Once on board, she moved to the flight area, where she greeted Vordan Parr, the pilot. "All on board, pilot. Ready to go when you are." "Thank you, V-Deck. Pre-flight is done. We are ready to go." Thanking him, she returned to the cabin, ensuring that everyone was seated and strapped in before dropping into a spare seat next to Ariel. The weapons specialist smiled faintly at her, then closed her eyes, leaning her head back. Smart female, it was still early and today was going to be arduous. Odran sat across from her. His gaze snagged hers, trying to catch her attention. She smiled politely at him and closed her eyes, determined not to be distracted by their personal drama. She really couldn't have chosen a worse time to break her dry spell. What the hell had she been thinking? She was stuck on this damned colony with him for at least a year. The transport jerked for a moment before it smoothly took off into a gentle ascent. Her HUD pinged discreetly, and she opened her eyes and blinked once to accept the message. It was a text-only message from Odran. She stifled a groan. "Can we talk?" Her eyes shot over to meet his, and he lifted an eyebrow inquiringly. She glared at him, then closed her eyes again, her jaw set. Her HUD pinged again, and she gritted her teeth. It pinged again. She sent him a message. "I know this relationship thing is new to you, so for reference, this is really annoying. It is not winning you any friends." It pinged again and again. Hissing out a breath, she accepted the messages. "Please. I want to apologize. I was an asshole." She clamped her mouth tight in case she accidentally swore at him. She would be professional even if it gave her an aneurysm. Using the slow, visual text interface, she painstakingly messaged back, "Seriously, you want to do this now? This is not a good time." "Please," he immediately responded. "Make a fist. Now punch yourself with it. Better yet, take out your knife and stab yourself." He burst out laughing, and Ariel spoke into the silence. "Whatever you two are saying to each other, either share with the group or shut up. I want to get another half-hour sleep before we need to do mission briefs." She opened her eyes and looked at Zera. "Respectfully, ma'am." Zera flushed crimson, gave Odran one final death glare, and closed her eyes again to go over her mission plan in her head as the transport flew on towards the crater. She let her mind drift, going over the plan she had developed, until Vordan messaged her they were 20 minutes out from their destination. "All right, everyone. We are 20 minutes out. Mission briefing. Pay attention." The others sat upright to listen. She streamed the site plan to their shared HUD channel. It appeared in bright blue, overlaying their vision. As she spoke, various sections of the map lit up in orange to indicate their targets. The crater pillars and surrounding area are unstable, made of a porous rock liable to crumble under pressure. We cannot safely land the transport, so we will drop into the north end of the crater site. Once down, we will set up a beacon while Vordan circles. Once the beacon is up, our equipment will be mid-air dropped after us, and it will home in on the beacon automatically. She pointed to Ulfa and Odran. "You two are on beacon duty. It is your priority. Phase 1 will be to establish a secure base. Tarlak and Ariel, you will secure the site. I want perimeter scan bots installed in the walls and a shield generator up within an hour. Ulfa and Odran, once the beacon is done and the equipment is down, you will set up camp. Acknowledge." Ariel and Tarlak snapped out, "Acknowledged, V-Deck." Odran and Ulfa startled, belatedly realizing this was a required response before confirming their assent. Phase 2 will be to scout the crater and install stabilizing tech. Primary objective is to locate any evidence of ancient alien technology. We will start by looking for the site that Odran found last time. Odran and a security officer will be our scout team. Ulfa, you will work on installing the supplementary equipment such as comms boosters, scanners, and anti-grav bots, which we will need if we find the tech. You will be assigned a security officer at all times. One security officer will remain off rotation. Security personnel will work in shifts of 8 hours. No one goes anywhere alone. Aside from the potential of another saboteur, the area is prone to cave-ins. No one wants to be stuck in the dark alone where no one knows where you are. Acknowledge, the group chorused. Acknowledged, V-Deck. Assuming we find the tech, Phase 3 will be assessment and relay of data. Ulfa and Odran will catalogue and assess whatever we find and prepare a report for Colony Command. From there, we will await further orders. Questions? She paused, waiting. Ulfa looked both excited and terrified, but the others seemed calm and ready. Very well. Buddy up, check each other's suits and then your packs. We reach mid-air drop zone in 10 minutes. Final acknowledgement. The last response was firm. Acknowledged, Vedek. She watched as Tarlak turned to Olfa and began examining the straps on his jumpsuit. They had been outfitted with combat suits, tightly fitted and a pale tan colour with brown splotches that would blend well with the cavern floor and walls. The suits were dotted with low reflectivity interface crystals that would scan their environment and their own bodies, providing a constant stream of information to both the wearer and Zera, as their commander, on their environment, location and health status. The suits themselves captured waste and water, recycling the water through inbuilt filters powered by the body's heat, motion or environmental energy, like sunlight. Sealed pockets bulged along the legs and torso, containing emergency rations, nano-block patches that could transform into any manner of useful products, flares, field scanners and weapons. Each officer had been provisioned with a laser knife, a field hunting knife, and a low-energy pulse pistol. Zera's security team had been allocated a suite of additional weapons in various sizes and ranges. Zera instructed Ariel to assist Odran while she moved to confer with the pilot. As she moved into the pilot area, she took a couple of calming breaths. She had led teams before into much more challenging missions, including multiple hot combat situations. But this was her first mission on this colony, and the secrecy of the mission entrusted to her was an honor. She would not fail at this. Are we ready, Vorden? Yes, Vedek. I will give you a 2-minute alert. He waved his right hand through the virtual dash in front of her, then held it out. Her HUD overlaid her vision with a virtual icon in his hand in green. When she touched it, it informed her it was the drop zone timing alert. She smiled at him and pinned it to the top right of her HUD overlay. Thank you, pilot. He turned to her, his usually cheerful demeanor solemn. Look after them, Zera. I don't want to have to medevac anyone else out of this damned crater. It's a death trap. I can't even get below the rim without my instruments going crazy. If the worst happens, we'll try our best to get to you, but there are no guarantees. She reached out and touched the back of his hand with a fingertip. I will do everything in my power to keep them safe, Vorden. You have my word. She stepped back, and the corner of her lips lifted in a wry smile. Don't worry so much, you'll get grey hair. He huffed in mock offence, pulling forward a lock of his long, steel-coloured mane for examination. That's it. I'm taking you back, female. You are unfit for command. You are clearly blind. Chuckling, she returned to the hold. The countdown flashed 3 minutes to go. Jumpsuits checked. Acknowledge. Acknowledged, ma'am. Gather your packs and connect for drop. They efficiently moved to the small packs stored next to the drop door. Tarlak and Ariel lifted the drop harnesses and assisted Odran and Olfa to step in and connect to the lift system. Zera was pleased to note that Odran and Olfa were calmer now. Verit males regularly practiced these kinds of drops as part of their youth training. This was familiar ground. Ariel efficiently checked Zera's suit. Zera connected herself and hefted her pack, and did her last walk along the group to check all were correctly attached. When she got to Odran, he lifted the harness to show her the connection without being asked. She didn't want to be distracted, but had to chance a look at his eyes to get a sense of his demeanour. When she did, the appreciation she saw there almost floored her. The genuine confidence she saw in his gaze relieved an anxiety that she had not been aware she had been holding. She had been afraid that after Odran challenging her authority in front of the cadet, he would undermine her during this mission. She didn't think he was that kind of male. She wouldn't have agreed to spend the night with him if she had. But after his outburst, her confidence in her judgment of him had been shaken. The acceptance of her leadership and appreciation for her skills warmed her, gave her a tiny kernel of hope that all was not destroyed between them. Perhaps they could be friends after all this was done. Her HUD alert flashed the 2-minute warning, just as Vorden's crisp voice echoed through their communal HUD channel. 2 minutes! Assume drop positions, Goddess bless and protect. Tarlak and Ariel, you will go first. Odran and Olfa, wait for my signal. Everyone nodded, and she opened the drop door. The air swirled into the hold, its icy talons scratching at any exposed skin, whipping hair into lashes that stung. Tarlak and Ariel stood on the rim, gazes focused, bodies ready. The HUD alert turned red, flashed 3 times, and then turned green. A large target appeared in their visions, indicating the drop zone. Vorden's voice echoed again. Go for mid-air drop. Tarlak and Ariel stepped off the edge of the craft, dropping into the early morning twilight and falling away into the gloom. Zera was glued to her HUD display as it fed her data on their elevation, speed and heart rate. When they both touched down, she motioned to Ulfa and Odran up next. Ulfa hesitated, and Odran reached over the younger male. "Come on, brother, let's do this together." Odran smiled at her as he stepped off, dragging young Ulfa with him into the gloom with a whoop. Zera gave a startled laugh at his antics, her heart lifting a little from the tension of the mission. When her HUD alerted they had landed safely, she took one last look around the hold and stepped out into the air herself. It was cold and crisp, and the second sun was cresting over the edge of the forest. It lit the dew on the trees and plants into a carpet of shimmering crystals tinged in lilac from the violet suns. She was shaken again by the beauty of the planet. How strangely peaceful it was, floating down. The transport engines were a dull roar, and the air whipped past her face. But she felt cocooned in her feeling of rightness. This planet welcomed them and wanted them here. She passed below the surface of the planet into the dark cold of the crater. It was full of columns of rock, some as tall as a person, others like skyscrapers. The rock was pale and looked crumbly, and there were many broken columns, fallen giants that littered the floor of the cavern with blocks the size of transports, others leaning drunkenly on their piers. She touched down and disconnected and messaged Vorden to confirm. His reply was immediate. "Thank you, Vedek. I will circle until I can detect the beacon and eject the equipment pods." Odran and Ulfa were already hard at work on the beacon, and in short order they had it set up. The equipment pods landed gently with a puff of dust, and Vorden signalled he was leaving. In just a few minutes they were alone in the gloom at the bottom of the crater. Zera paced the perimeter of their designated campsite. It was an indentation against the wall of the crater. Not a true cave, just shelter formed by an overhang that sloped gently back into the distance, like a colossal thumbprint in the wall's base. The floor had a strange consistency, a slight give to the porous surface. She gingerly picked her way across the floor to their site, which was relatively clear of debris. Her HUD told her that Tarlak and Ariel were setting up the perimeter sensors and scanners. The crater felt strange to her senses. She had the vaguest impressions of waiting, of expectancy. It was unsettling, like someone was hidden watching her. She stood, waiting, extending her senses out. She wasn't strong enough to give an emotional nudge to her quarry, nor could she telepathically connect, but she could invite whatever it was to join her. The world seemed to still, to hold its breath. Then the feeling vanished so completely it was as if it had never been. Shaking off the creepy feeling, she went to help Odran and Ulfa set up the camp. The day passed quickly. Tarlak and Ariel returned to the base camp late in the afternoon, dusty, cold and hungry. They had spent the better part of the day clambering around the cliffside, installing sensors, and then digging into the rock to install their security bots. Odran, Ulfa and Zera had set up the campsite. Their tents, cooking appliances, bedrolls and sanitation facilities were largely automated. Once dragged into place, the small biodomes expanded and anchored themselves, and all they had to do was connect the utilities. Ulfa had set up a small nano-generator which would provide power for their equipment, and the dropped pods included potable water, reclamation and food supplies. They could easily stay here for weeks without needing resupply. Things were peaceful. Odran had not tried to talk to Zera again, and perversely it left her feeling frustrated. She knew it wasn't reasonable to feel irritated with him after she had explicitly told him to go away, but she hated things being unsettled between them. If they were going to be stuck out here for weeks, they had to make their peace, for the sake of everyone else, if not for them. Ariel was Falosian and highly empathic. She had already picked up on their tension, and it was only a matter of time before the Verit males did as well. Deciding it was now or never, Zera messaged Odran. "Do you want to talk?" His reply was immediate. "Yes, lady, if you have the time. Meet me outside of the camp on the south side. You can do the perimeter walk with me before we sit down for dinner." Odran's stomach was churning, and he wasn't sure if it was excitement or anxiety. He desperately wanted to apologize to Zera for his outburst. He met her at the south side and began the long walk around the perimeter they had established. They walked in silence for a while before he spoke up. "I am sorry, Zera. I never meant to undermine you or your authority." She glanced at him and continued walking. "Thank you, Odran. I accept your apology." He frowned. This formality was not what he wanted. His Zera, the real Zera, was passionate and funny and divine in her fury. This controlled individual was the commander, not the female, and it scratched at his temper that she would use formality to keep him at a distance. I mean it. I was angry and hurt at being excluded. I realize you were trying to ensure the success of your mission, and I shouldn't have taken my shit out on you. She opened her mouth to speak before thinking better of it. Please, Zera, say whatever it is you want to say. He smiled a little. You can yell at me if it will make you feel better, I don't mind. She sighed heavily, his attempt at a joke falling flat. The issue isn't that you yelled at me. I know you weren't trying to undermine me. I can feel your intentions, remember? He nodded. The issue is that I don't think you are dealing with your shit, as you put it. You've let being injured get inside your head and undermine your sense of self. You need to work it out, whatever this is, before you do something more self-destructive. He stared off into the distance as she spoke, quashing his instinctive desire to reject her statement, to say that he was fine. I worry that you'll do something stupid and reckless to prove you are healed when you aren't, and maybe hurt yourself so bad that Denny can't put you back together again. He laughed harshly. I'm a healer, not an idiot. I won't do anything stupid. She stopped and pulled him by his arm around to look at her. You already did, Odran. Besides, do you think healers are immune from stupidity? That you have some sacred blessing that means you can't screw up just as badly as the rest of us? He tried to pull away from her in agitation, and she reached up to his face. That single palm against his cheek stilled him, focused his attention on her. I'm not good at emotions, Odran. There are dozens of other Falosians on this planet that would be better at this than I am. But I would like to think we are still friends at least. I don't want to see you hurt. He jerked away from her, stung. Don't worry, Zera. I won't burden you with my issues. I would hate to be an inconvenience to my friends. She growled in frustration. For the love of the goddess, why are you such a dick? That is not what I meant. Blessed Fala, you make caring about you an act of bloody torture. I'm trying to help you, you creven. He spun back to her, grabbing her by her shoulders. Don't you get it? I don't want to be just friends, Zera. I don't want to show you the dark wilderness of my soul. I don't want to see it myself. You are the last person I want to show my shit to. I've spent the last 2 weeks staring at you, wanting you. Every time you laughed or showed a move, I just about lost it. I wanted to beg you to touch me. I wanted to taste you. She stared up at him in shock, clearly torn between wanting to kiss him and thump some sense into his stubborn head. This was the last thing she needed. He drove her absolutely insane. They were terrible for each other. And I won't accept a relationship that isn't honest. I won't be with a male that hides who he is from me. If you want purely physical, go to a pleasure planet, Odran. Get a synth doll. She tried to wrench her arm away and he crowded her closer. You think that would satisfy me after you? One night with you and I'm addicted. I'm not responsible for your feelings. If you need relief, use your own hand. She grabbed her knife from her belt and wedged it between them, pressing it to his balls. Take your hands off me, Odran, or I'll give you another injury to worry about. He leaned closer to her, his lips nearly touching hers, and he felt the prick of her knife. It would be worth it. He licked the seam of her lips, seeking entrance, and he felt the tip of her knife press slightly harder. Not enough to cut him, not yet, but enough to know that he was very close to the edge of her temper. I know I'm a total mess just now and I screwed things up, but I don't want to give up what we had the other night. It was incredible and please don't give up on me. On us. She tensed for a moment before she softened and allowed him to kiss her. He wrapped his arms around her, lifting her lithe body tight against his. He walked her backwards to a large boulder, pinning her against it and wrapping her legs around his waist. He twined her braid around his hand and kissed the breath out of her. Their jumpsuits were fastened tight to their bodies. There was no way to open them to provide relief without damaging them, so he positioned his hand between her legs and rubbed through the material, letting the rough fabric create the friction she desired. It didn't take long. Within moments she gasped out her release, sinking her teeth into his neck to muffle the sound from echoing through the caverns. You can't just seduce me into agreeing with you every time we argue, Zera whispered as they lay together after. As long as we are still together to argue, he responded. You know that's toxic as hell, right? You pulled a knife on me, he replied reasonably. She snorted. You deserved it. You touched me without permission. She sighed. Do you know any good therapists, healer? He helped her place her legs down, hugging her gently. I'm truly sorry, Zera. Whatever this is between us, I don't want to lose it. It's special. And I meant what I said. Work on your shit, Odran, then we'll talk. So I haven't blown it totally then? He asked, his voice solemn. He couldn't hide the coil of fear and insecurity in his voice. She couldn't help smiling and smoothed his frown lines with a fingertip. Not totally, although making out on perimeter detail would earn us both a punishment if anyone found out. We're lucky nothing snuck up on us. She moved away from him, and he could see her rebuilding her emotional armor, building the distance necessary for her to command the mission. He clung to her words, trusting that they would have time to work out their issues when they returned to the colony. Come on then, you can finish my perimeter walk with me. They walked in companionable silence as the late afternoon deepened into true dark and cold. Zera activated her night vision mode on her HUD, and Odran's eyes flooded navy, adapting to the dim lighting. They were heading back to the campsite when there was a scratching sound ahead of them. Zera froze and motioned for them to move to the lee of a boulder. She activated her HUD and used the visual interface to send a text message to their shared team channel, showing that they had detected movement and were investigating. A breeze whistled through the cavern and brought with it a mixture of scents. Odran inhaled deeply, sorting through the sensory input before nudging Zera. He placed his mouth next to her ear and whispered, I detect only animal scents. It is most likely a native creature. She looked at him, considering, and expanded her senses. It feels predatory. She cocked her head, listening, feeling, and immature. She stood. It doesn't feel threatening, more curious. Come on. They crept along the path. As they approached where the creature had been, there was another rustle. Odran listened. We've scared it away. He knelt down to examine the footprints. It appears canid. See the claw marks and the smaller back paws. Zera nodded. Tracking was significantly outside her expertise. She was a professional soldier, not a hunter. As they wandered back to camp, they occasionally heard rustles, as if the little predator was following them, but didn't glimpse the creature. The group decided on an early night. Ulfa had made some food, and Tarlak and Ariel were already turned in for sleep as she arrived. Zera activated the perimeter security bots and took the first on-call watch. They weren't in active watch, not yet, so she could doze. The bots would wake her if they detected anything. Chapter 9, Envoy.
Encrypted transmission from Envoy. Confirmed arrival at the colony. End transmission.
The cadet waited at the bottom of the ramp, watching the Envoy exit the shuttle. The ship was small, sleek, and heavily armored, meaning it was incredibly expensive design to transport important guests planetside in safety and comfort. It had not travelled all this way under its own power, which meant there was a mothership somewhere, and wasn't that interesting. There could be hundreds of personnel on it. Next to the K-deck stood Lucius, in full First Warrior furs and badges, the maman leaning heavily on her cane, and Lenora, her chief of logistics. The colony security personnel lined up behind them. Lucius's face was stone, giving nothing away. The maman quietly seethed. It still amazed the cadet that the female could appear so frail, but have an energy that could sear any empath within 20 scree. The Malurian envoy looked like Sin. Physically, he wasn't entirely dissimilar to human template species. In dim light, a female might pass him and think him attractive, but the similarity was superficial only. Genetically, Malurians had evolved on an entirely alien planet. They were not descendants of Earth, human template, but something else entirely. He was tall, clad in a long, swirling leather coat that hid the contours of his body. His skin was grey, dotted here and there with protruding black horns. His eyes were dark red, rimmed in gold and sunken deep. The cadet started when she saw the red horns curving down from his ears and back from his knuckles. He was a member of the royal family. When he smiled, as he did now in welcome, black lips pulled back to reveal row after row of small, red-tipped fangs. When a Malurian bit their prey, the prey rarely survived. 2 Malurian security personnel, covered head to toe in dark red armoured uniforms, accompanied him. Not a single sliver of skin showed on them. The cadet stepped forward, bowing her head slightly. "Welcome, Envoy. What a surprise." The Malurian laughed, the sound like a snake hissing. Not that unexpected, since you had time to assemble a welcome party. His eyes roved over the assembled security and landed on Lucius. "I see your male even put on a pretty outfit for me." Lucius stared him down impassively. his face unmoving, and the Kedek cheered internally as the Malurian settled back, clearly disappointed that his barb had not resulted in a rise. "Aren't you meant to be good at this, McEnroy? Where are your famed diplomatic skills?" the maman asked. "My lady Maman Free, I hardly recognized you there." The Malurian turned to her with a twinkle in his eye, before arranging his alien face into something resembling compassion. "I know it is not done to comment on a lady's appearance, but you look like something my pet Aravak dragged in. I've been unwell, McEnroy. Do not worry, I am on the mend." The maman's glare dared anyone to say different. "Excuse me, Kedek, I have been remiss in my duties." He turned back to her, sweeping his leather jacket back to reveal a dark red suit jumpsuit, studded with dark interface crystals. "I am McEnroy, envoy from the Alliance to your charming colony 29. I must say, you are the double of your sister." "Thank you, McEnroy. That is to be expected, we are twins." McEnroy laughed his sibilant titter again, and the hairs on the back of her neck rose. "Before we proceed, envoy, I must know, by whose authority are you dispatched?" His smile dimmed, and for a moment she saw a flash of something in his eyes, before his charm reasserted itself. "Dear lady, I do not understand your question." "You may address me as Kedek." Morale smiled tightly. "I wouldn't think that it is such a troublesome question. Who sent you here? Whose name is on your orders to come here? My sister is Sadai, the Falosian ambassador to the Alliance, and she was unaware of your dispatch here. Doesn't that strike you as odd?" McEnroy spread his hands in the universal gesture for who knows. "What can I say, Kedek? I am but a humble servant. My orders came from the Alliance command. That is all I know." The maman hummed. "Are you in the habit of going where strangers send you? How very mysterious and exciting for your life. Perhaps when this is over I can assign you a side quest." McEnroy hissed his laugh again, clutching his chest dramatically. "My lady, you wound me." The maman raised an eyebrow. "No, dear. When I wound you, you will know, because you will be standing in a pool of whatever passes for blood in your species." The Malurian arranged his face in a picture of abject despair, and the Kedek resisted the urge to roll her eyes. He should be on the Galactic Entertainment Network. "I only come to provide aid to your charming rustic colony. Word of your troubles has reached the ears of the Alliance." He spread his fingers wide, interlacing his nuchal horns. "We bring you supplies, medications, replacement equipment, and a sympathetic ear to champion your cause with the Alliance." "How strange, and here I thought we paid our ambassadors to do that." The Kedek let the moment draw out. "Very well, we grant you entrance. Thank you for your supplies. I'm afraid that we do not have any spare accommodation just now, so you will have to stay on your ship. I also assign you a security officer for your time here. For your safety, of course. Not that I think your personnel are incapable." Her eyes flicked to his guards, who had not moved at all during the interaction, and showed no reaction to her barb. Thank you, most kind. This is Tedek Tyler. She will be your security for the first shift." The young officer stepped forward and bowed smartly. "And this is Judek Lenora Patra, who will show you where to drop your supplies. She manages our logistics." Lenora stepped forward. "If you would follow me, please." McEnroy smiled broadly and followed her, trailed by his silent companions. As they left, the maman moved up to her shoulder. "Well done, Kedek, well done indeed." "I fail to see the benefit of the encounter, ladies," Lucius rumbled from behind them, and they turned. The maman tutted. "Really, Lucius, you are meant to be good at strategy." He gritted his teeth. Surely it would have been better to have him remain unaware of our insight. The Kedek shook her head. "No, Lucius, that crack about my sister was telling. He knows we are related. They may even be monitoring our transmissions. It was better to have him think he has allayed our suspicions for now." Lucius nodded reluctantly. "I have a new assignment for you, First Warrior. Find and track the ship he came on. That little pleasure shuttle didn't get here on its own. There is a mothership nearby, and I want to know what it is doing at all times." "Yes, ma'am." The Kedek screwed up her face and sighed heavily. "I hate politics." "You are surprisingly good at it, dear. Thank you, maman." The maman nodded graciously. Lucius looked at them in horror. "You two agreeing is almost more terrifying than the Malurian." The maman smiled tightly. "Don't worry, Lucius, we will be back to warring once this is over, but only a fool chases rabbits when there's a Dathalka after the flock." Chapter 10, What Lies Beneath.
Encrypted transmission from Envoy. Confirm equipment and personnel detected at a crater site to the north of the base. Security personnel dispatched to investigate. End transmission.
3 days. 3 days of searching, and nothing. They had found the cave entrance Odran had scouted on his original mission, and as expected, it was blocked by the cave-in. Figuring that they might find a nearby cave entrance that would connect to the network of tunnels, they systemically worked through a search grid in a spiral pattern, edging out from the original cave entrance. The problem was not that they couldn't find caves. There were hundreds of the damned things. The landscape was literally pockmarked in crevices, caves, potholes, and more. It took hours to clear each sector, and each one had to be inspected, either visually or with the use of bots. None of their usual sensor technology, which under normal scenarios would have mapped the entire crater in an hour, would work down here because of the Zelan refraction. None of the typical geologic markers were present that would indicate caves. There were no streams, no unusual vegetation patterns, nothing. It was tedious, frustrating work. Plus it was freezing. The temperature had gradually decreased since their arrival, and the base of the crater was so deep, the sun's rays rarely reached it. Their jumpsuits kept their bodies warm mostly, but any unprotected skin, such as faces or fingers, was exposed to the biting cold. The Verit males didn't mind the cold. Verit was a freezing wasteland after all, but they grumbled incessantly about not having all the little comforts that Verit had developed to support a society living in such conditions. It also meant that they had to sleep in their jumpsuits, which meant that they were all smelling ripe. Zera was not interested in their whining, at all. They were here to do a job, and no one promised it would be fun. She was more concerned about their lack of progress. Deciding she needed a break from it all, she sat on a large flat boulder, a piece of one of the fallen columns just outside of camp, pondering her next move. There was a stark beauty to the dark crater. It wasn't silent. The wind, constantly moving through the columns, created a continuous sighing melody that changed with the temperature. The pockmarked landscape was rugged and challenging, and it appealed to the soldier in her, to her desire to throw herself at the world in contest. Scratch, scratch. She froze, not wanting to scare the creature off. That was the other reason she was out here. Every time she went on patrol, she had felt it watching her. She had begun leaving little offerings of food, hoping to befriend it. Out of the corner of her eye, the creature appeared. It was small, barely up to her knee, and appeared to be a mammal. It had dark red fur that lightened to a pale gold on its muzzle, paws, and belly. Large black eyes in the front of its head, over an elongated muzzle with fluffy circular ears that twitched and rotated. Clearly a smaller predator. Its rear legs were large and muscled, going down to delicate rear paws with small claws, and as she watched, she understood why. It sat back on them, raising its front legs, which were short and similarly muscled, tipped by 4 sharp claws. When it put its front legs down to creep forward again, its shoulders were articulated, fascinating. It would be fast, flexible, and strong. It shuffled forward, gold wet nose cautiously sniffing the air, looking for food. Ever so slowly, she reached into a pocket and pulled out a strip of meat jerky that she had appropriated from the male's ration stores in anticipation of meeting the little creature. It pondered the offering she held out, weighing whether it was worth the risk of getting close to her. She extended an empathic tendril to it and reassessed her judgment of its intelligence. It was smart, curious, hungry, and mildly telepathic. It was also a he. "Hello there, little one. Hungry?" She pitched her voice low, soothing, and accompanied it with an empathic suggestion of friendship. He cocked his head, looking at her, before taking another tentative step closer and stretching out an unexpectedly long neck to snag the meat with sharp little teeth. He darted back, settling on his muscular rear legs and raising up his forearms to hold the offering for him to nibble on. It was adorable. As it ate, she could sense it judging her. She resisted the urge to laugh at the seriousness of its examination. "How do you live down here, little friend? Can't be much prey." She noted its condition, the lush red fur, and wondered about its habits. It must have a food source or a way out of the crater. After it finished, it took another tentative step towards her, and she held out an empty hand for it. "I'm sorry, I don't have any more today." It snuffled her hand with its wet nose before gently head-butting her hand and huffing in dissatisfaction. She chanced giving it a little scratch behind the ear as she laughed quietly at its grumble. "I'm sorry, I'll do better next time." It huffed again and settled down next to her on its rear legs, watching both the landscape and her. As they watched, gentle snowflakes fell. The snow rapidly covered the landscape in a thin sheath of white crystals. While Zera appreciated the view, practically it was inconvenient. It was already hard enough not to step in the myriad of tiny holes. If the snow lay where it landed, they would have to call off their exploration for safety reasons. She allowed herself a few minutes to luxuriate in the view, noticing the little creature get progressively closer to her, presumably for body heat. The view really was stunning. The towering broken columns, the clean snow and the gentle eddies that formed from the wind through the rocks. Eventually, duty called. She sent an all-team message to reconvene at base camp for a planning session. As she stood to leave, the little creature darted back and away, and she sent it one final wash of friendship emotion as its bushy-tailed butt sprinted off into the snowfall, to dash into a crevice between two rocks that was free of snowfall. Tapping a finger to her lip, she considered, and calmed Odran. "Healer, can you come to my location, please? I'd like your assessment of something." "Yes, Videk," came the immediate reply. When Odran arrived, she pointed at the crevice. "Notice anything strange?" He nodded, seeing what she had immediately, his gleaming with interest. "There are several reasons a crevice would not carry snow. Geological formation, composition of the rock, but none of those are relevant here." He moved over and placed a scanner on the edge of the hole. "As I suspected, the temperature is slightly higher around the rock face. It could indicate that this crevice is deep, bringing up geothermal heat or moisture from below, which melts the snow. Could we set the bots to do a visual scan of the area, identifying points where the snow does not lay, and target them for exploration?" Odran nodded enthusiastically. "Great idea, it should narrow the search considerably. I'll work with Olfa on reprogramming the bots straight away to scan for both heat and visual anomalies." "Excellent." They began the short walk back to camp together. "It really is a brilliant idea." "You don't need to sound so surprised. I do have them occasionally," retorted Zera. "It will save us a lot of time, and honestly I am surprised. It's brilliant." He looked at her mischievously. "For a female." Zera's brain clunked so hard she stopped dead in her tracks. "You did not just say that to me," she said, outraged. Odran shrugged and sauntered on. "I'm just glad to see that your association with me is starting to have some positive effects." She tackled him to the snowy ground. "Take it back, right now, you arrogant asshole!" He laughed and wrestled with her. "Nope, you bite far too easy." She grabbed a handful of snow and rubbed it on his face, and he erupted in curses and shoved her off. "Admit it, you thought it was funny." "No." He grabbed some snow and began to form it into a compact ball. "You're smiling." She circled warily. "No, I'm not. It's a grimace. I heard you laugh." I was sighing in disgust. He took aim and fired at her. Strange sort of sigh. She dodged, the ball flying wide. "You're strange. Just admit that you think I'm funny." "Never." Zera dusted herself off and turned for camp, her nose in the air. He laughed and caught up to her, sniggering the whole way back to camp, to her teeth-gritting frustration. Back at camp, they shared the revised plan with the others, who were more than happy to have an evening at camp, warm and safe, while the bots scouted the area. In the morning, hopefully, they would be able to finally progress with the mission. Several times during the evening, Zera caught flashes of movement in the darkness, and reaching out with her mind, she found her little friend, full of curiosity about the strange creatures that had invaded its domain. They turned in to sleep, and Zera had barely had an hour of rest before something awoke her. There was no sound, just a sense that something wasn't right. She extended her senses and her mind was flooded with panic and rage. It almost overwhelmed her. She had to slam her mental barriers down immediately to prevent her own debilitating panic reaction. Lurching out of her tent, she opened her barriers just the tiniest bit to locate the source and stumbled towards Odran's tent. She ripped the seal open to see Odran lying on his pallet, his muscles clenched, body stiff in fear and pain, heart racing. His eyes were closed. He was lost in a nightmare. Without thinking, Zera lunged at him, desperate to break him from his dream before he could physically damage himself. She grabbed at his shoulders. "Odran, wake up!" she hissed. She had only a split second of warning. He stiffened entirely, back slamming straight, before his eyes flicked open, unseeing. His claws sliced out and she jerked away, the sharp edges passing so close to her face she felt the wash of air at their passing. He shoved her back onto the tent floor and landed on top of her in a tangle of legs. He reared up, arms raised to slash at her again when her training took over. She slammed a foot into his leg and twisted to throw him onto the pallet again, before leaping away to give herself room to defend herself. Odran lay on the pallet, blinking owlishly in the light as he awoke. "Zera, what?" He went to stand up and cursed as his leg gave way and he crumpled to the ground. She was there in an instant to help him. "Are you back with me?" "Where did I go?" he mumbled. "And why does my leg hurt like blazes?" "You were having a nightmare. You tried to skin my face." His eyes opened wide before he gulped reflexively. "I'm so sorry, Zera. It's all right, Odran. I know you didn't mean it. I'm sorry about your leg, but I had to get you off me." He shook his head, waving away her apology. He levered himself up to sit on the bed and rolled up his jumpsuit leg to reveal the purpling welt. "Oh, Odran, I'm sorry." She reached out a hand tentatively to examine his leg. "Let me get a med kit." He reached out and smoothed her frown. "It's fine. I would rather this than know I had hurt you. Is this some stupid male thing? It's clearly not fine. It's swelling to the size of a melon. Where is your med kit?" He pointed to a box in the corner and she fished out some healing gel. She sank to the floor in front of him and began carefully applying the gel to his leg. He winced occasionally, despite her gentle touch, but gradually relaxed as the gel numbed the area. "What were you dreaming about?" "Nothing," she sighed. "Can't you just answer me once? Do we need to do this dance each time? You know you'll tell me in the end. Can we just shortcut it this once?" He glared down at her, the dim light casting his face into shadows. "I'm pretty sure I already beat it out of you." He snorted in laughter, then sighed. "I was dreaming I was down there, in the dark, under the cave-in. Only this time no one was coming to rescue me. It was just me and the dust and the dark, the weight pressing down on me." Zera stilled. It must have been awful. He looked at her, stark terror in his eyes. "I have never in my life felt helpless like that before. All my healing training, my warrior skills, none of it meant anything." She reached over and gripped his hand and he held hers fiercely. "I was sure they would never find me. I waited for hours." Zera could only nod and offer him her silent support. Nothing would take away the fear, the pain, except time. He needed to lance this wound. He spoke into the dim light between them. "I lay there, pinned by my legs, hearing the rocks groan around me, as I slowly died." She reached over and pushed his hair back from his forehead. "I can't change what happened to you, Odran. You'll carry the scars of it with you wherever you go. But I can promise you, if you fall again, I will come for you. You'll never have to worry that I would stop looking. I won't leave you behind." She pressed the most delicate of kisses to his cheek, gossamer wings against his skin, but it seared him to the bone. This wasn't just affection or lust or friendship. The kiss spoke of something much, much deeper. Zera stood. "It's late. We need some sleep. Hopefully we'll go caving tomorrow." "Will you stay?" He held out a hand to her. She regarded him solemnly. "Do you really want me to? We can't do anything in our jumpsuits." "It's not about sex. It's about you. I just want to hold you." He flashed a smile. It was a pale, wan echo of his usual charming brilliance, but it was a smile. "I don't know how or why. We've only spent one night together, but I miss snuggling with you." She laughed aloud. "All right." He lay down on the pallet and opened his arms, and she crawled in next to him. She was so strong and competent, it amazed him how delicate she felt against him as he curled around her. She snuggled in and then chuckled. "What now?" "You really smell. You need a bath." He laughed and flicked the command to turn out the lights on his HUD. "You aren't exactly a floral bouquet either. So romantic. I didn't say I minded. Good night, Zera." He kissed her forehead and she tucked her nose under his chin and closed her eyes. "Night, Odran." The next morning, they received the first telemetry, and the plan worked better than Zera could have imagined. The telemetry revealed 5 potential cave sites. Excited to finally make progress, they split into 2 teams. Ariel and Ulfa took off towards the northern sector to investigate 2 sites. Zera and Odran headed south along the wall of the crater to investigate a further 3. Tarlak had been on the last on-call night watch, so he stayed behind to rest and monitor the camp. They left the camp in high spirits, optimistic about their chances. 8 hours later, Odran and Zera trudged towards the last site, cold, tired, and ready for dinner. They had been hiking all day, and the previous 2 sites had been a bust. The caves were there. One had dead-ended after just a couple of scree. In the other, they had wasted several hours moving through progressively tighter tunnels before calling it quits. If that cave was the way down, they were in serious trouble and would need explosives to break through. Ariel had been comming every hour and had struck out on both of her sites. They were already en route back to the main camp. If this site didn't pan out, it was back to Plan A of painstakingly searching manually. The last site was apparently in the middle of a wide open space in the crater floor. It was the first expanse they had come across with none of the tall towers. Despite the lack of cover, they nearly missed the entrance. It was so small. The only sign it was there was a lessening of the dusting of snow on the rock formation around a crack. As they neared, they realized the crack was actually a crevice between 2 boulders, forming a low valley that sloped down into the darkness. Considering the entrance, Zera calmed Ariel. "We have located the 3rd site and are going in." She shared her location with Ariel. "We will comm every half an hour while we can. If we go dark for over 5 hours, come look for us." "Acknowledged. Good luck." Odran jumped down into the crevice, landing lightly in a crouch, and Zera laughed. "Fancy. My lady?" He flashed a charming smile and held his hand out to her. "Thank you, sir," she quipped, throwing her backpack at him and hopping down next to him. He rummaged in his pack and withdrew a torch, handing it to Zera as she took off into the corridor that had formed in the gap. It was narrow and tall, just wide enough for Odran's broad shoulders. They crept along the gap, cautious of their footing on the crumbling floor as the passage moved under the rock face and plunged into darkness. They wandered for several minutes before it abruptly opened up into a larger cavern. The cavern was smooth and oval, the ceiling so far above them in the darkness that they couldn't see it, the walls veined in silver and gold traceries that glinted in the dim torchlight. Odran reached out a hand to Zera's shoulder to stop her and motioned for silence. He cocked his head, sniffing delicately before heading off. "I can sense air movement. There is another entrance over here." Zera followed, more than willing to take his lead. Verit was a frozen planet, and its inhabitants spent a significant portion of their lives underground, their cities powered by geothermal energy. Odran was much more familiar with underground transit than she was. The new passage was much lower, and Odran had to duck to avoid whacking his head on the rock. They walked on, checking in on schedule, the connection patchy but viable. They passed through strange patches of hot or cold air, and at one point Zera swore she could sense a faint thrumming like machinery, but it stopped before she could pinpoint a direction. As they walked, she could also sense Odran's increasing disquiet. "Are you all right, Odran?" He nodded sharply, his breath deepening. "If you are having problems, I need you to tell me. I need to know I can trust you." He spun to look at her, his eyes a little wild. "You don't think you can trust me?" She cocked an eyebrow at him. "I thought we weren't going to do this again. I trust you with my life. I'm just not sure that I trust you with yours." He teetered on the edge of anger before he slumped, defeated, and raised a shaking hand to wipe the sweat from his brow. "I'm not doing well," he murmured. Zera could see his jaw clenching, the veins standing out on his temples. I'm having trouble being underground." Zera sucked in a breath. "Since when?" He didn't look at her. "All day. It's been getting worse." "I see." Her mind clicked, putting the pieces together. "And you didn't think this was relevant information I should know when we were going to be underground for this mission?" "I have it under control." "All right." Zera's voice was non-committal. "I didn't want you to know." Zera didn't respond. Odran resumed walking. They had only gone another scree when she heard his breath hitch again. "Zera?" "Yes." "Can you talk to me, please? I need a distraction." "All right, what do you want to talk about?" "How did you learn Delma Layat?" Zera consciously relaxed, relieved the question was so normal that they could step away from the tension between them. "That's easy. My mother teaches it. She taught all of us sisters, but I'm the only one that kept it up as a passion." "Do you have many sisters?" "Yes, 5. 5? Odran's voice was incredulous and Zera laughed outright. "Yes, 5. My mother always wanted a big family, so she had artificial insemination. She got a set of twins, the triplets and me." "Are you close?" Zera nodded and belatedly realized that he couldn't see her behind him. "Yes, very. They were upset at my decision to come here where they couldn't easily visit, but I was itching for a change, for something new. She paused, considering whether she wanted to ask the question burning in her mind. Dinara told me you had all been ordered here, that you didn't volunteer. Did it bother you? She saw Odran's silhouette shake its head. No, I was happy for the chance to pursue my research on a new planet, to try a different way of life. They paused when the tunnel branched and took a left turn. Within a few minutes they emerged at another cave entrance that showed snow outside. Odran noted it on his map. This is a secondary entrance. Let's go back and head for the right-hand tunnel. They returned to the tunnel and continued walking. Zera could feel Odran's anxiety rising again and picked up the threads of their previous conversation. So, has colony life lived up to your expectations? He barked a laugh. Well, getting a bunch of rocks dropped on me wasn't great, but the rest... He trailed off for a moment and she thought he had finished. It is more than I could ever have dreamed, he whispered softly, reaching back to squeeze her hand for a moment. Did you come here to find a mate? He asked. Not really. I'm open to it if it happens, but I mostly wanted the adventure and the land grant. What about you? He hesitated, and she could feel him deliberating whether to tell her. I would like to find a mate, but I owe a life debt to the maman. I do not think she would ever allow me to mate freely, as in Verit culture, my mate's wishes would have precedence over hers. Zera paused, sensing that he had shared something extremely private. She didn't want to ruin the intimacy that they had created in the hushed darkness of the cavern. I am not aware of that aspect of Verit culture. What is a life debt? How did it happen? Odran's voice was tight. I cannot say. Suffice that she granted me a boon in my youth, and I agreed to a life debt in repayment. Until I can repay the debt to her satisfaction, I am bound to follow her orders in all things, even beyond the level of obedience normally expected from a Verit male. To her satisfaction. She could literally order you to do anything forever and you'd have to do it. Or what? Odran was silent for a long time. I would be executed, he said flatly. My clan brothers would also bear the punishment for my dishonor. Zera snorted. That is ridiculous. Why would you agree to such a stupid deal? He spun round. Do not judge what you do not understand, my lady. My culture is not yours. I gave my word freely and will honor it. His eyes snapped blue fire that she could see, even in muted light. I should not have told you, even Luke doesn't know. But I wanted you to understand that if we progress further, I cannot promise to mate you. Don't change the subject. We are a long way from mating right now. Let's go back to why Luke doesn't know if you did this as a youth. Wasn't he your guardian? He grabbed her shoulders. Desist, Zera. Please, I beg you. You ask what I cannot answer. We'll see about that. She shook him off. When we get back, I'll ask the cadet to look into this life debt. What is wrong with your maman that she binds a child to a lifetime of debt? Is slavery still acceptable on your planet? He stiffened and growled low at her. You dishonor us, Zera. I do not want or need your intervention. I am a Verit male and I will do my duty. She is not the evil wraith you paint her as. The maman has supported me and guided me my whole life. She supported my desire to study medicine, to grow beyond my warrior birthright, to come here to this new planet. Zera opened her mouth to argue further when the comm activated, the broken message audio only. Videk, come in, urgent, under attack. We are under... Tarlak, escaped. I think injured. Ariel, I read you, confirm, did you say under attack? Yes, Videk, base camp is... attack. Security deactivated, unknown. Uniforms, military operation. Tarlak, injured, functional. Confirm. Is the base compromised? Yes, Videk. Zera considered her options for a split second before replying. Get to our position. The cavern is hidden. We can regroup here. Bring as many supplies as you can. Acknowledged. Your position. 3 hours. Zera's stomach lurched and she looked at Odran, fear filling her for a split second. He reached over to pull her into a fierce hug. She let herself languish against him for a moment, their personal battle forgotten. She stiffened, her mind already turning to what to do next. Set the bots to visual scan and continue exploring this path. We need to know if there are any other entrances to this cave. The last thing we need is them coming up on us from behind. Odran nodded, kneeling to remove his pack and pulling out 3 of the tiny silver spheres. His HUD interfaced, and they floated on a pale green light in front of him, receiving their instructions, before zipping off along the tunnel, sounding like angry bees. In parallel, Zera inventoried their weapons. They had only minimal armaments, their knives, their low-energy pulse pistols, her high-energy pulse rifle, and a couple of multifunctional units that could be set to a range of uses. All of their perimeter security equipment was at base. She clenched her fists. The situation was dire. "Come on, healer. We have to double-time it back to the entrance. We'll need to detour to that secondary entrance and set some defenses there on the way." They took off back to the entrance, and their transit seemed agonizingly slow. As she ran, she turned over scenarios in her mind. Whichever way she looked at it, they were screwed. She had no illusions about their ability to defend against a well-armed military force. This wasn't an entertainment saga. People would die. Most likely hers. At the secondary entrance, Zera used one of her precious multifunctional units and set it to scan for movement and notify her. With a single command, she could instruct it to overload and explode. She positioned it just inside the narrow cave entrance, hoping that if it came to it, the explosion would close the small opening. It was the best she could do for the moment. At the main entrance, she used her final multifunction unit, praying that Ariel or Tarlak would have some with them. She also set up the last 2 scan bots, sending them floating away. One she positioned on the crater wall behind them above the entrance, set to wide view and scan for movement. The second she positioned facing towards base camp, several scree out, to provide some advanced warning. When the bot reached its position, it reported movement, and the streamed visual in her HUD showed Ariel and Ulfa supporting an injured Tarlak. He looked terrible. His right leg was wrapped from thigh to shin in bandages to a splint, bright red blood seeping through in patches. "Ariel, come in. I have a visual on you from a bot." "Videk, a military force attacked base camp approximately 4 hours ago. There was no warning. 10 individuals dropped from a stealth shuttle and used some kind of interference tech to get behind the security perimeter. I've never seen it before. They captured Tarlak and were interrogating him. We killed the interrogators and snuck out of camp. It's just a matter of time before they discover they're dead and they'll mount a pursuit." "Acknowledged. I have set up what I can for security. You are about 10 minutes out of our position. Could you recognize who they were?" Their uniforms had no insignia, standard space jumpsuits in environment-sensitive camouflage. They spoke in galactic standard, but I heard several other languages used between individuals. Zera whistled in appreciation, considering. Multiple languages used meant mercs, most likely. Most official forces were tied to their planetary alliances and species and spoke a common language, but environment-sensitive camouflage meant money, and lots of it. The specialized jumpsuits could change color and texture to match any environment, and made the wearer damn near invisible. Assassins commonly used them. To outfit an entire battle group meant this group was most likely highly trained, and they felt that whatever the group was doing was worth the expense and would result in a return in investment. Zera considered her options again. She had 3 soldiers, 1 partially functional, and 2 more scientists with some warrior training. Her team had run no battle simulations and had minimal ammunition. Up against what was most likely a highly trained group of mercenary assassins, it was suicide. Their only actual option was to call for help and dig in to defend. "You are 10 minutes out, Ariel. Odran will come to meet you to assess Tarlak and guide you back in, past the security I've set up." She motioned to Odran, who nodded and started climbing out of the gully. "I will call for help." "Acknowledged, Videk." Zera took a deep breath and switched HUD channels, reaching out to Lucius. "First warrior, come in, please. We require immediate assistance and evac. We are under attack." "Videk, report." Zera gave him a quick summary of the situation. "Tarlak has been tortured and is injured. His condition is being assessed. We will mobilize a security team and can be there in 4 hours. Can you defend until we get there?" "Possibly. I have set up a security perimeter, but we don't know how far away they are. Keep that team alive, Videk. This is why I chose you for this mission. We are coming." She was bolstered by his faith in her. "I will, First Warrior." Zera refused to allow herself to consider failure. They would all get out of here if it was the last thing she did. Although she admitted to herself, it may well be the last thing she did. Thanks for listening. Check back soon for the next part.